Hey, welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth. This is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
This week we have watched Season 1, Episode 6, House of the Rising Sun.
Which, as you might guess from the name, it's about Jin and Sun.
Back on the island, we've got a dispute over whether or not to move inland to the caves or to stay on the beach.
So this week we really wanted to do an interview with Javier Grillo-Marxuach, who wrote this episode. He was a writer and producer on the first 2 seasons of the show. Unfortunately, he was not interested in talking to us, but he did send us a 40-page essay, which is very, very interesting, and was not something that was ever published anywhere until several years after the show ended. So I think we both learned a lot about the making of the early days of Lost from this essay, so we'll be talking about it.
Stay tuned. Okay, as always, we start the podcast with immediate reactions, hot takes, if you will. Sammy, what's your hot take?
Oh, my hot take. My hot take this week has to do with Jack and Kate and Sawyer. I think we've talked about before how I think we both think that Kate and Sawyer were always a much better match than Kate and Jack.
Yep.
And I just think that you start to already see that this episode. The sort of flirtation moment between Jack and Kate is so horribly awkward.
Well, there are several of them, and they're all awkward.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of the especially bad one where Jack's like, if I was checking you out, you'd know it. But anyway, but then you also get that scene with Kate and Sawyer, which is, like where they're, sort of teasing each other about, are you going to go to the caves or not? And already it just felt there to me like, yeah, this is much more chemistry, much more interesting. Like I'm enjoying watching this scene way more. So always a little disappointed that wasn't the direction they went.
Agreed. And the thing I reacted to most strongly in this episode was also a Jack-Kate moment. It's when Kate decides...
Wait, is this your hot take?
Yes.
Okay.
It's when Kate decides to stay on the beach, and there's a moment, it's like a 1-minute scene that's a private conversation between her and Jack, and she tells him she's going to stay behind, and Jack says, how did you get to be this way? What did you do? And Kate says, you had your chance to know. Well, why does Jack have to make this about something bigger than it is? Like, she doesn't want to go to the caves. I'm sorry. She decided that Saeed's plan was better, and she decided to stay behind. Not everything is personal, Jack.
Well, I think I might have to disagree with your hot take.
Shoot, please.
You see, okay, so I interpreted that scene as being about Kate's, thing about running everywhere, always running away from stuff. To me, the conflict between... Jack and Saeed and Kate and whatnot, this episode really had to do with, are we trying to get rescued or are we gonna settle here? Like, are we giving up on rescue or are we gonna make our own lives here? And to me, what Kate is afraid of is she doesn't want to feel like, okay, this is where I am, I'm staying here, I'm, settled on this island. She still is thinking about, getting away and running to the next place.
But we haven't even established the Kate is always running from something plot arc.
I mean, she has established that as a human being.
We only know about one thing that she ran away from.
Right. But I'm just saying, I guess this may be a hindsight point of knowing what we know about Kate, this is how I am choosing to interpret her decision to stay on the beach. She doesn't want to get stuck there.
While that may be true, this is not the sort of place that you necessarily want to get stuck. It's a deserted island. And it's a lot more rational to say, I want to be rescued from this godforsaken place than to run from something in our sort of everyday first world lives.
So you would have been on the beach with Saeed?
Honestly, yeah. Yeah, I would have stuck with Saeed.
Can we talk about this a little more? Because I wanted to bring this up. Because I was thinking myself, would I have gone to the caves or stayed on the beach? And I don't know, Jack sort of pitches it as the rational thing to do, clearly rescue isn't coming. This is where the fresh water is. This is where we'll be most protected. And Saeed, I think, reacts badly to that and has his own sort of rational explanation of, no, this is a deserted island. There are polar bears. We don't know what's going on in the jungle. We're fucked if we stay here. The most rational thing to do is do everything we can to get rescued.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess I don't know which one is right.
So... Well, yeah, and neither is necessarily right or wrong. And, of course, they don't get rescued. So Jack ends up being right. But I think... So they've been on this island for, 8 days? 9 days?
Something like that.
I don't think we need to give up hope yet. If I'm them and I'm on this island, I think I would certainly keep trying to get rescued for at least a while longer. I don't know where the breaking point would be, but I don't think it's after a week or a week and a half. And, carrying all that water is going to be a pain, but you've got 46 people who have literally nothing to do. What's the harm in putting 5 people a day to work just shuttling water and doing nothing else? I mean, I don't think there's a shortage of manpower, which Jack seems to think there is. I think the being near the water obstacle could have been overcome.
Now, when you spell it out that way, that makes sense. But it also just makes me wonder, what is it about Jack that makes him want to give up so easily?
I think Jack has already dismissed the idea that there's ever going to be rescue.
He definitely has.
I don't know why.
I mean, I think that was baked into his live together, die alone speech of just like, we're going to have to live together here.
And we know that Jack is pretty single-minded. And I think that's an instance, I think this is an instance of that, rather. That he found this water, he found this cave, he put, 1 + 2 + 3 + 4 together and came up with this plan.
He has. One other thing I was just thinking about was, and this is sort of a recurring thing for everyone, but also what they have to go back for or not. And I guess I was wondering, does Jack, because Saeed, I mean, clearly, as we learn later, he has Nadia, who he still wants to find someday, and that, I think, could help explain his motivations. But Jack, I mean, his dad just died. He clearly does not have a great relationship with his mom either. He has not been...
He's divorced,
He hasn't been that happy in his work since he, lost his dad his job. So for Jack, maybe... I mean, we talk about the island as a place to, start over. And I think, potentially there's something there that for Jack, this is a legitimate new shot and he doesn't want to get back that much.
And of the main characters, who self-selects to the caves? It's Jack, John, Charlie, and Hurley?
Yes.
And there's not really anybody else who's named, at least that we see at the end of episode 6.
Hurley, who, as we know, is thrilled to get away from the curse.
John, of course, whose legs have been healed.
Yes. Charlie, who's now managed to make an early sort of move towards getting off the drugs, or so it seems.
Charlie's still a mixed bag.
Maybe.
Oh, no, he never went back to the beach with Jack and Kate. He and John stayed behind to go through the plane, so he never really had a choice. But I don't know if there's something to that or not.
I would like to think that I would stay on the beach, but I might have gone to the caves. That's my final conclusion.
That's okay.
Should we talk about Jin and Sun?
Probably. So I sympathize with Sun a lot more than I remember sympathizing with Sun. I remember the first time I watched this thinking that she was just cold and heartless and how dare she...
Wait, I have totally the opposite take.
Really?
Yeah, my recollection of this episode was, oh my gosh, Jin is so horrible to Sun, and I felt myself sympathizing with Jin way more this time. Not relative to Sun, just more.
Interesting.
But anyway, go on.
Yeah, no, I
so
mean...
you thought she was cold and terrible?
The first time, I thought, how dare she make this decision?
Which decision?
To leave Jin, all in the flashbacks. But this time, no, I could see it more and more. I think the progression is really there, and it's clearly over the course of like several years, because you see the dog grow so much bigger, and there are those little cues that tell you that a lot of time is passing. I don't know. I kind of wonder if she should have just done it. I mean, obviously they reconcile and become very devoted to each other on the island, but no, I don't begrudge her that anymore.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely don't begrudge her that, because my recollection of this episode was just, Jin was being such a jerk to everyone, and he beat up Michael, and he, the scene that they show in the previously is in this episode where he's like, button your top button when she's talking to Michael, which really stuck with me for whatever reason is kind of a horrible thing. But yeah, I guess I had forgotten how much of the flashback is also dedicated to, showing that Jin is, has become this person out of love for Sun and out of, misplaced or not, wanting to do what he thinks he needs to do to be with her. Mm-hmm. And that it definitely seems to have warped him in a certain way, because you see the early flashback scene where he's so sweet and gentle and loving and, so different from the person he's become on the island.
And then by the final flashback scene, he's like, get this dog off the couch.
Yeah.
Because he's working from home, and it's,
Yeah, I mean, still when Sun is standing there in the airport, it's like, okay, if she decides to go, that's totally a sympathetic, you understand why she's doing it. But, yeah, I came away feeling more positively about Jin than I had in the past.
I still love the reveal where you find out that Sun speaks English.
So good.
It's so much better than I remembered.
Right. And you think it's going to be just another one of these awkward, like, Sun and Jin making eyes, or Sun and Michael, like, making weird eyes at each other, but it's not. and she pulls it off without Jin finding out too. I'd also just forgotten how good Yeon Jin Kim is.
She's great.
And she hardly talks, like, the whole episode. It's just, she makes faces, and it's great. Not to move away from Jin and Sun too quickly, but I also really, really enjoyed the Locke and Charlie story in this episode. And we've talked the last couple weeks about Locke, like, very quickly becoming this, you call him the spirit guide?
He is my spirit guide.
He is your spirit guide. And it's just, I find it interesting how quickly he takes ownership of, like, okay, it is my job now to help Charlie deal with his issues. And the moment where he says something like, you need to give the island something. Like
and it might give you something in return.
Right. But really what he's saying there is give me some, because physically, Charlie's going to give Locke the drugs. And it's sort of like Locke is already sees himself as this conduit to the island, I thought. You give the island something, it'll give you something. Charlie gives him drugs. Locke points out the guitar.
Right, which is Locke giving him the guitar. It's not the island ostensibly saved the guitar, preserved it or whatever, but it's Locke revealing it.
It is, and clearly Locke just saw it there and knew.
A while ago.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that Charlie is sort of Locke's first convert, if we can call it that, or his first... Charlie, after this, if I remember correctly, becomes quite, since we're talking in sort of religious terms here, becomes kind of devoted to Locke.
He does.
Doesn't he? He's following him constantly, and when they find the Virgin Mary statues, I think they're together. But yeah, Charlie sort of very concretely has this issue that he needs help addressing, and Locke is there to do it.
So here's a question. Is Locke... And I love Locke, so I almost hate to ask this, but has Locke, is he doing this just out of the goodness of his heart, or has he identified Charlie as, like, he is one of the weakest people on this beach, and he is someone who I can very quickly, bring onto my team because he has such an easy need that I can fill?
So I think that can go one of two ways, and it's kind of the same thing, and it just depends on your frame of mind. Like, Locke identifying Charlie as one of the weakest, quote-unquote, members of the group is kind of the same as Locke identifying Charlie as a man who really needs help and who he can help. And it's all about Locke's intention, right? It's whether he's simply, altruistic and wants to help, or whether he's sort of preying on people or trying to sort of build his coalition or whatever the case may be. In the same way that people who evangelize for their own faith generally think they're doing it for the good of other people, but people who are not religious oftentimes see that as preying upon people, the quote-unquote weak or the poor, or, I think that's how I would answer that question. I think it depends on your frame of mind.
Right, so how you read Locke in this situation might just be how you read religion.
It could be.
I guess because I asked it because I would love to believe that Locke's intentions are only good and honorable, and I think in the long run, that gets proven out as you know more about Locke. But I guess I was also thinking about the end of season 2, where Locke decides, we're going to stop pushing the button and we're going to see what happens because he's sort of lost his faith. And Boone
ends up getting seriously injured because he follows John too.
You're right, definitely.
And eventually dies for it. And I think John is well-intentioned, but I don't think he's as smart or as wise as we want to think he is. He's kind of foolish in a lot of ways. Like, he's experienced a miracle, and he wants to, in some way, he's sort of come to develop this faith-based relationship with the island. And he wants to share that miracle, or he wants to evangelize, basically. He wants to share this miracle with as many people as he can, even though he hasn't actually told anybody about it. Except Walt. But he doesn't tell him what. So he wants to spread the news, spread the gospel, call it whatever you want, and take the allegory as far as you want to. But that doesn't mean he knows anything about the island, because he really doesn't. He knows that he experienced a miracle, but it's not like he's well-versed in how this island works. Right. He still has no freaking clue.
And it's not like when the monster looked at him, it's like all the secrets were revealed.
Well, clearly because he had no idea what the monster was, or that it was a monster, or that it wanted them all to die. Like, or that it would later inhabit his body. Like
his dead body.
Right? All of this stuff that he doesn't know, and that do lead him into disaster when he thinks the island will take care of them or, and it doesn't. So I think he is a little foolish in his devotion. But that doesn't mean he's not altruistic. That doesn't mean he's praying on Charlie, right? Yeah, he wants to do good. He just doesn't fully know how.
Should we get to the Javi?
I think we should. Yeah.
So as we mentioned earlier, we really wanted to talk this week to Javier Grillo-Marxuach, who wrote this episode and was a producer and writer on the first 2 seasons. He didn't want to talk to us, but he sent us a 40-page essay that he wrote called "The Lost Will and Times" of Javier Grillo-Marxuach, in which he talked about everything. So he was there at the beginning. He was in like the think tank that was developing the story of the show while JJ and Damon were working on the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really interesting things is he talks about Jack was going to be killed in the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was going to be this big shock, and Michael Keaton was going to play him, and he was going to do press for the show, and like everyone was going to think Michael Keaton was going to be the star, and then he was going to die.
Right.
And so Javi had a really interesting reaction to that. He read the pilot when he came in, and I'm just going to read straight from his essay here. He says, "My most salient note on the pilot was that murdering the one white male character with a discernible skill set that could serve to generate stories, at the very least Jack was a doctor, would not go over very well with the network. What I said was, you can't kill the white guy."
And then he goes on to explain that without Jack, in 2004 when the show was being developed, what the network felt they would have been left with was a cast of supporting characters. I had serious doubts as to whether American network television would welcome a show anchored by a warped, frustrated, middle-aged guy with delusions of grandeur.
Which does sound like many, many shows, so I'm not sure
today. That I mean, what's Breaking Bad, right?
Men,
I mean, yeah. So maybe times have changed in the last 15 years. Or an overweight Mexican, or a non-Anglophone Asian couple, or a character who was likely to be played by an actress whose most salient speaking role up until then had been in a commercial for a late-night chat phone line in Vancouver.
Which I assume must be Kate.
And this, while being kind of blunt, I mean, even today, the majority of shows are helmed by white men.
Yeah.
Who are sort of relatively young, relatively fit, relatively educated. And there's a spectrum within that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the education, one other point he adds here is that, most of the time the lead of your show is a handsome white guy with an advanced degree in criminology, law, or medicine.
I mean, I appreciate how blunt he is about this.
Yeah, and I definitely remember that as well. It was such a big deal that they had this diverse cast, and now to go back and to see, the network was still like so uncomfortable with that it's like, no, we needed to star the white guy with the advanced degree. And that's the end of the story here, that he was right, that, JJ and Damon came back from a meeting with the network and were like, yeah, you called that one.
Yeah.
I was also thinking, watching this episode and knowing we were going to talk about this bit of the essay, we've talked about who would have been the leader if not for Jack. And I think Sayid made a really, again,
strong argument for Sayid. Well, because if you are going to go with the skills argument, Sayid has the most useful skills.
He does. And he just takes charge of everything. Yeah. I mean, with Jin beating up Michael this episode, Sayid was like, okay, we're going to get the handcuffs. We're going to, stick him to something. We're going to wait a couple hours and make him sweat. And then we're going to figure it out. And he was the only one who had a plan to deal with that. He was the only one who even tried. I would have, and
it would have been really interesting if he and John had become foils rather than Jack and John.
Oh, they could have been great foils.
Oh my gosh, that could have been amazing.
Because Sayid is, even more than Jack in some ways. Sayid is so practical.
Yeah.
And so, just down to business and like, I'm going to get shit done now, and just so the opposite of Locke.
Yeah.
And yet, as Javi says here in his essay, he is the reformed Iraqi torturer, which is, I'm sure still today, hard to sell a network on a show starring a reformed Iraqi torturer. He talked about how much the network, ABC, was adverse to running a show that was really heavy on sci-fi, which is super surprising when you know that Lost ultimately turns into this crazy, wild sci-fi.
That totally hinges on time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it all hinges on time travel. And so what he says here is that, I'm just going to...
Here it is. He says... We had to continually promise during the show's development, the filming of the pilot, and even well into the first and second season, that at most our sci-fi would be of a grounded, believable, Michael Crichton-esque stripe that could be proven plausible through extrapolation from hard science. Of course, that was a blatant and shameless lie told to network and studio executives in the hopes that either blazing success or crashing failure would eventually exonerate us from the responsibility of explaining the scientifically accurate manner in which the man-eating cloud of sentient smoke actually operated.
Oh man, yeah. So,
long sentence.
But yes, the man-eating thousand.
This is pretty funny because it's true. Like, it wasn't apparent to me as a viewer that Lost was going to be heavy on the sci-fi at all until the Dharma Initiative was introduced.
Yeah, and so...
But even like he says here, that's pretty light sci-fi. Like, the notion that there was this sort of band of rogue scientists doing strange social experiments on this island, like, that's totally within the realm. That there's a
mysterious... Right, yeah. And for a while, as they do that, it still seems like they are going to try to, do the science explanation.
They bring in Daniel Faraday, whose name is Faraday,
oh my gosh.
And they bring in that band of scientists, and they seem to suggest that there's some explanation that hinges on electromagnetism. I mean, it's
right.
bull,
which people like me got really obsessed with at the time and trying to understand what was quote unquote actually happening.
Right.
But what do you think? Do you think they could have done it without sci-fi? Because it's like I'm enjoying the early episodes, right? Like I'm enjoying them more than I thought I would. The characters are super interesting. They have ridiculous tragic backstories that are fun to watch. But how far could they have gone with this, Lord of the Flies style, conflict on the island without it
just being Lord of the Flies?
Without it just being Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like the Dharma Initiative. I think that's a great backstory. I think that's a great explanation for what went on this island beforehand. We'll discuss this throughout, but I'm more conflicted about the mythology underlying the island of Jacob and his brother and, their mother and this creation story. I'm not that crazy about taking it from the sci-fi to the mythical, but I'm on board with the sci-fi.
I generally agree in that they thought that the Dharma stuff was ultimately more compelling than Jacob and the Man in Black, but I also wonder, could you have done Dharma and the others without the more mystical stuff, because so much of that ended up hinging on, there is this mysterious power in this island. And that's actually something else that that Javi talks about here, and I'm just going to find this bit. He says, on the first day of, working on this, Damon downloaded us on the notion that the island was a nexus of conflict between good and evil, an uncharted and unchartable place with a mysterious force at its core that called humanity to it to play out a primal contest between light and dark. He says that, in the 2 years he worked on the show, he never heard mention of Jacob or the Man in Black. Clearly that was not an idea that had been developed yet. And he says, presumably, as the length of the series increased, the writers needed to find ways to turn mere concepts into dramatic constructs, preferably with the ability to say dialogue.
Because what kind of it bums me out about the mythos, or is that the word?
Yeah.
Mythos? Is that it's just these two guys who were brothers and who had this very, human fight. Like, for me, there's not enough gravity to that story to carry the weight of all of this web of stories that's built on top of it. Like, if I am able to see that as truly a cosmic conflict or this sort of great universal conflict between good and evil, and it has its nexus, it has a physical nexus in the core of this island, that's way more interesting to me than there were once two brothers and they were trapped and now they are eternally at war.
Yeah.
But I wonder if there's, because he's right about the realities of trying to portray this on television. I mean, how would you tell the viewer this is a cosmic conflict between the universe's good and, without capturing those two things in spirits? I mean, I guess you could have had a lot more scenes like the one where Ben confronts the smoke monster down in the temple.
Which is one of the best
which
scenes
is
of the whole
so
show.
Good. You could have had a lot more stuff, or you could have just had various smoke monsters, I guess.
Yeah, I always kind of expected that there would be a white smoke monster. I remember in that script writing competition I mentioned last week, that was something that happened. There was ultimately this conflict between the white smoke and the dark smoke.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's difficult, and I agree with you for the most part, and I think it speaks to something you see elsewhere in Lost as well, where anytime you try to get too specific with answering a question, it ends up being a little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
Because it's that's specific.
Well, it's easy to be a critic.
Yes.
I can't pretend to have come up with any of these ideas.
No.
So.
And we'll talk more about, there's some great stuff in this essay where he talks about how they came up with these ideas and what was shifting and what they knew and what they didn't, and we'll get into some of that in future weeks. thank you for listening. Next week we're going to be talking about The Moth. It's a Charlie episode, the first Charlie episode.
Oh, yes.
Follow us on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. We will post, put up this whole document that we're reading to you from and post a link so that you can absorb it all yourself if you would like.
Absolutely. As always, you can call us as you're watching Lost at Home, or even as you're listening to the show. If there's something that you want to get in on, you can call 9546-DHARMA. Leave us a voicemail. We'll play it on the show.
Rate us, review us on iTunes.
Yes.
Always.
We also need to say that our wonderful theme music comes from Andy G. Cohen. And I think that is it. So we look forward to seeing you next week.
Namaste.